Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. It's great to be, let me just tell you, it's great to be home. I grew up just a few blocks from here on the Chicago side, and I'm Medill. Anyone here from Medill? Go Cats. Any Northwestern here? Yes. So it is just wonderful to be back on campus for the wonderful Chicago Humanities Festival that we're here. I want to give a shout out to my high school buddies who are here, Barb and Louise, thanks for coming. And my Chicago Sun-Times friends and my sister, Maureen, Bunny, and Nancy, who have come up with me in the streets of Chicago journalism, all of which Jim and I have covered for many, many years. So this morning, our conversation is in some ways going to be bouncing off some of the things that Jill wrote in her book, which is, of course, why I came anyway, and I am sorry that Jill couldn't join us. So in this next bit of time, we're going to be talking about the transformation of the news business and the changes it triggered in journalism. We're going to be talking about that all this started happening even before Trump became president, but it's having its impact now in the 2016 campaign and this ever-evolving 2020 campaign. So we have a lot to go through, and we'll be taking your questions. So I want to start out with Jim, just asking him, and we're going to be in a bit of a conversation together. Jim, could you just set the stage in a sense and give us an overview of, as we hurl through this next bit of time, trying to dissect it, of what the big view is of where we're at now?
Sure, and thanks to Allison for at least explaining how I've morphed from the person who was going to introduce this to now sitting in front of you. It's more than happened about 20 years ago on MSNBC. I was the guest one night. I was going to be the first guest on the John Hockenberry show, and John was in an Albanian refugee camp, and with a few seconds to go, I heard in my ear from Secaucus, New Jersey, O-S-H-I-T, we just lost the satellite. Jim, you're the host. What? And I within 15, 20, I said, so what am I supposed to do? Well, just say we had some problems, blah, blah, and then introduce the piece on what Congress did today by Mick. Jim Miklas. Anyway, so I did that, went fine. There was applause in the control room in Secaucus, New Jersey. And then because a younger Brian Williams just happened to be exiting the Secaucus studio to go home back to New Jersey, or wherever he lived, they grabbed him and said, I think we need you as emergency host. So when we came back from commercial, there was never any explanation how I had morphed from host back to guest. So thanks again to Allison for at least making that a little bit clear. Today was a perfect morning for me prior to coming here, since I want to give a quick big picture of what's going on in the media. Since my morning started, if you had any doubt about how the way we consume information has changed, my morning started at 5:30 looking at my phone's weather app to see what the weather was like in Glenview, because I have a 10-year-old who had a soccer game at 8 o'clock. I then looked at his private soccer club soccer app to see if the game was still on. I then texted a mom to ask her to take the kid back from the game because I had to go to Evanston. I then quickly checked the Sun-Times on my phone to see what was going on with the strike, because we have a sophomore who's in CPS, only to find out, somewhat to my chagrin, that Chance the Rapper had touted the union last night as he hosted Saturday Night Live. I said, oh, cripe, this is going to last forever. And then before leaving, I had to email a corporate lawyer in Manhattan with a question about a freelance story I'm working on. I left to go to Glenview, and what had traditionally been the source of my information every Sunday, the Sun-Times and Tribune Sunday papers, hadn't arrived yet, so still haven't looked at them. Social media sites, as I exemplified this morning, have now surpassed print newspapers as a source of information for Americans. So about 1 in 5 adults now say they often get their news from social media, and that's the first time that social media has surpassed print newspapers. Generally speaking, TV remains, good old-fashioned TV remains the most popular platform for news consumption, though its use has declined over the last 3 or 4 years. TV is then followed by news websites, then radio, then social media, and then papers. Among the different types of TV, first and foremost, lest we forget, is local television still, followed by cable TV news, and then followed by the major broadcast networks' evening newscasts. What are some of the big results of all this? One of the sad results is the creation of news deserts with changing economics in the industry. There are about 225 counties in the U.S. that do not have a newspaper. Half the counties, around 1,500, have one newspaper. That tends to be a weekly newspaper. More significantly, the economics have dramatically changed. And if you look at a market like Chicago, or it could be Albuquerque, it could be Bangor, Maine, Facebook, Google, Amazon now take more than 80% of the digital advertising. Advertising has basically moved from print to digital. They're monopolizing it. There ain't much left over. In the digital field, maybe there's about 6-7% for print folks like the Tribune and the Sun-Times. That has meant a disastrous hollowing out of newsrooms around the country, and over a very short period of time, just about 10 years, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a 25% decrease in newsroom employment around the U.S. And I'm not just talking about newspapers. I'm talking about all newsrooms, including digital startups. But if you look at what you had 10 years ago versus what you had now, 10 years ago you had around 114,000 newsroom jobs, and that's a loose definition. It's reporters and photographers and editors. And we had about 114,000 10 years ago. Now we're down to about 86,000. That's a drop of 28,000 jobs. The ramifications are obvious. Far fewer people, there are far fewer things you can cover. We'll get into this much later because there are probably a lot of folks here who are diehard New York Times or Washington Post readers, and those are really very much exceptions that prove the rule that one sees throughout most local markets in the country in a period in which nobody has any clear sense of what a business model might be for local news. So that's just sort of a general way to frame what's going on. And with that, and we'll get back to that, Lynn, I have to turn to you about the subject du jour. It's almost the subject of every jour, which is this unusual, weird guy who was in the White House. This morning, coming out and taking credit, basically, or seeking credit for the death of a big ISIS leader, Baghdadi, going into astonishingly, and maybe in some ways rather indiscreet details about how he died, the sort of stuff that must drive national security folks absolutely nuts. And along the way, also making clear that Vladimir Putin knew about all this via Trump before Nancy Pelosi did, or any Democrat, because he wasn't going to tell them. He trusts Putin more than he trusted them. One of the clear images one has these days of Donald Trump is not behind a lectern, as he was this morning, but not behind a lectern in the James Brady press room, where you've spent a lot of time, but outside the West Wing, Marine One helicopter whirring in the background, and Trump just sort of vamping and talking extemporaneously for long periods of time to folks shouting questions at him. It's a rather dramatic difference in the way a president disseminates news. Tell me about what that all means, why he's doing it, and why it's important.
Well, thank you. I want to do a follow-up on what Trump, in his long revealing discourse this morning, by the way, on the death of the ISIS leader. I have a theory that somehow he understands that he wants to, since he is so consumed in some ways with the Barack Obama presidency. He wanted to have an identical or similar moment in the Situation Room where he's making a decision. All I'm waiting for is a picture of him in it to rival the historic one of taken in the Situation Room under the Obama administration. But getting back to the question of why is Trump out there now? It is because he wants to be the singular messenger and the message of his administration. The White House under Trump has long stopped giving briefings. I actually don't miss them because you didn't get much out of them anyway. If I have a question, I could get it answered anyway. Perhaps you all know Donald Trump is making his first visit to Chicago since he's been president tomorrow. When I needed information about that, I didn't need to go to a briefing. I just did what reporters do. I talked to people in the White House and got the scoop. Now, it doesn't mean, though, that we're not getting information. The reason Trump likes that particular format is the following. So I've been told. He did not like the grandstanding of reporters at briefings, which does happen. He does not like that some reporters have been able to leverage the briefing and the provocative way they ask questions, that they've leveraged it for some into contracts to appear on TV. And he doesn't like that he can't have a spotlight on anyone but him. So this is what suits him going outside. There's only one camera shot. When you're in the briefing room, there are cameras in the very back to do the head-on of who's ever speaking at the podium, and there are also a row of cameras on the side to do a cutaway shot. So when a reporter stands up to ask a question, that's how they get on camera. That is now being denied by Trump, so there's only one camera angle, and it's on him. So he knows that. The other thing is, because the reporters can barely hear, it is very, very noisy, he can pick and choose a question by dint of whether or not he decides to hear it. And because everybody's spread out over a line, he could kind of do a thing of walking up and down to reporters and picking easier. He could see who's there and pick who he wants. Now, the White House Correspondents Association, just in recent weeks, is trying to impose some more order to this process in terms of the way people walk out. So print reporters often are overwhelmed because TV people and cameras, if they're in front of them, you can't hear anything. So there's a little bit that the association could do on our end to impose order. But you can't say that Trump doesn't want to talk to the press. He does now all the time. Is it a formal press conference where you have an ability to do a follow-up? No. Is it perfect? No. Is it better than nothing? Yes. And in a way, I would rather hear from him than a press secretary who's not going to tell you anything that you think is correct or useful anyway. So one of the things I hope you know, if you've come here today, that we are in a crisis area when it comes to the growing problem dealing with fake news. And I'm talking about real fake news. Not fake news being a story you just don't like. So defending the truth is part now of the job of journalists here and across the globe, because this fake news has been infecting civic life in a lot of places. And one of the things I'm hoping, Jim, you could talk about is your work as the executive editor at NewsGuard. You're kind of the cop on the beat to help people figure out what is worthy and what isn't. Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, in theory, fingers are crossed. We started about a year and a half ago. It's a for-profit startup in New York City on West 52nd Street, founded by two guys, one a very, very prominent a journalist, media entrepreneur named Steve Brill, who first came to renown about 1979 in the early 80s by sort of revolutionizing legal journalism through a magazine called American Lawyer. He also ultimately turned that into a cable TV channel, Court TV, which still remains today, though he sold out his interest a long time ago to, I think, Ted Turner. And his partner is a guy named Gordon Krovitz. Steve is probably a little bit left of center politically. His partner is right of center politically. He's former publisher of the Wall Street Journal named Gordon Krovitz. And our notion was to assess the credibility of actual whole news sites, not just the sort of thing one sees with some regularity, which is fact-checking a particular story, or fact-checking particular utterance, like the Washington Post does every day with Trump having, found now something like 10,000, I don't know, just thousands and thousands of misstatements and outright lies. Our notion was we could help all of this out by giving people a sense of what is the source of that story that somebody just sent them? What is that site? Because if you do look at the figures that we look at every day of website consumption, just even in the U.S. If I showed you the list of the top 2,000 sites, you'd know the first 10 or 15. It's Huffington Post and MSNBC and New York Times and Washington Post. And you would know the first 10. But it wouldn't be long after that you'd start going, what is that? And you'd be into the 200s and 300s and 400s and 500s, and you probably don't know many of these things, and they have giant audiences. So we thought we'd come up with a bunch of criteria. We've come up with 9 criteria, which are all sort of hard to dispute in assessing the credibility of a website. So, Lynn, it might be on transparency. Does the site tell you who owns it? Does it tell you who the editor is? Does it tell you how to contact them? Does it have a corrections policy? Does it run corrections? Does it identify news versus opinion? Does it properly identify advertising and so-called sponsored content? A couple of our elements are tricky and are given to tremendous internal debate. The trickiest one is probably, do you mix news and opinion? We've got lots of debate on that, and that can become a little tricky when you're talking about folks with clear ideological points of view, whether it's left or right. But so far, we have now assessed astonishing and exhausting 3,000 news and information sites in the US and also Europe. The Europe one is really tough because we're doing them ultimately in the native language. So we've got to get folks in France and Italy and Germany to first do their assessments in English so we can understand them, and then we will edit that stuff, and then it will be translated into the language. One of the more interesting things so far is this. Of the 3,000 we've rated, we have rated about 29% of them as not credible. And of those, a head-turning percentage, way more than we ever could have imagined, are health sites or sites with a heavy dose of health information. And it's not just crazy anti-vaccination sites. It's sites offering a variety of cures for cancer like apricot pits, seriously, and with large audiences. And health sites that you've never heard of that have much bigger audiences than, say, the Mayo Clinic website. So I think our figures are something like, of our red-rated sites, one's not credible, 37% are in the health information field. So that sort of just sets, Lynn, at least the challenge here. I don't know ultimately what the complete answer is. I'd love to think it's as simple as going to our website, newsguardtech.com. You go there and for free you can download what's called a browser plugin. So on your laptop or your desktop, whenever you come across a site that we have rated, whether it's CBS News or whether it's Huffington Post or whether it's some health site you've never heard of, you'll see a green for credible or a red shield in the top right-hand corner from us, and you can then click on and see, what we've done. We are, again, a for-profit. We started with several $1 million. We're going to need some more money. We're giving our product away free, perhaps to too many folks, including about 300 library systems around the world. So everything from the state of Hawaii library system to the city of Los Angeles to Dayton, Ohio. And in a few weeks, the Chicago Public Library is going to check us out when they reopen a branch near Douglas Park. And so that'll be our first test in Chicago. But do we have we'd like to think that lots of people around the world would check out what we're doing and have a better sense of whether the websites they're looking at are credible or not. But I think there's something like 1 billion or 1.5 billion websites. It's a real problem, and when one looks at how particularly younger folks like our kids consume information, and when one looks at the paucity of media literacy that's taught in our school systems, it gives one pause. It's a real challenge.
Which brings me to how the revolution we're living through and how we get news right now. And one of the things I want to talk about specifically is Facebook, and those of you who have read Jill's book know that she talks about it a lot. First, a quick story. It's 2004. I'm lucky enough to be a fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard. I'm talking to my students about this and that, and some of the students come in chatting about life on campus, and they said, I'm thinking of dating this person or that, so I'm going to look them up on Facebook. And I said, what's Facebook? And they said, it just started this semester. There's a guy, Mark, who has this website that's, that we use just to look up people that we may want to hang out with or go out on a date with. So during that semester, I thought I networked and met everybody who was important, missing the young student who was probably sitting 2 blocks away from me in one of the houses. So now it's today, and Mark Zuckerberg is responsible in a way for weaponizing information, and not in a good way. One of the things that you may hear about in the coming days that Facebook is announcing its news partnerships. Isn't that great? But let's look at the context of what they're doing, which is trying to have it both ways. Now, Zuckerberg, as some of you may know, was hauled before the House Financial Services Committee this week, and AOC decided not to really ask about the topic, the cryptocurrency, which is why financial services with it, and she just did hammer at him, and the hearing was on the future of Facebook, and she says to him, will you take down lies? And he wouldn't agree to it. Now, what do I mean by that and why this is important? Because so many don't understand that Facebook right now is not an innocent in this unfolding era that we're in, where it's hard to, and there is a need to, safeguard facts. The Trib and the Sun-Times would not knowingly, in print, run an ad that is demonstrably not true. It isn't seen as a free speech issue or a First Amendment issue. Facebook acts, and I think this is Jill's phrase, as if they're an innocent, neutral bystander, but the way they gin up the logarithm makes them not innocent. So one of the things that I think we need to think about as this is how this platform is used. And does having concerns about free speech allow Facebook to continue to have political ads that are not true? The most Zuckerberg would concede at this point is that maybe he'll just put them lower down in your feed. If you look at the Facebook and get this by Google, Facebook news platform, you could get even in their release that they think it's okay to cure this just by moving the bad messages down. And so, Jim, can we reflect a little bit on this? That is, Facebook is not an innocent. Zuckerberg seems resistant to making some fixes that seem important, especially when it comes to the issue of foreign interference. They were not quick to admit what became true, that through the use of Facebook, Russians and other players were able to infiltrate the 2016 campaign.
It does seem pretty incremental. I mean, we're sitting on a stage here. You're looking at us. The Zuckerberg point of view is that basically he is a stage. And anybody can come on that stage, and you, the thoughtful consumer of theater, whatever, will come to your decision about whether or not this stuff is believable. So when it comes to actual truth-seeking and, well, why are you putting up stuff that's just total BS and not true? He throws up his hands and says, well, that's not for us to decide. It's why, in retrospect, my operation, based in New York, might have been a little bit naive in retrospect. Our business model was in no small measure based initially on convincing Facebook and Google that for their credibility's sake, they had to partner with esteemed journalists like us and find cover in our legitimacy, and we would help all of you folks and help all of Facebook's consumers discern between health sites like the Mayo Clinics or the Cleveland Clinics or the University of Chicago Medical Center that were legit, and ones that were telling you have an apricot pit and you'll cure your pancreatic cancer. It took us a long while, more than a year, before we realized that both Facebook and Google had really no interest in ultimately partnering with us. They did not want to have someone pointing at them and saying, well, these folks on the stage are a total fraud. And even now, in the last few days, that they have unveiled this product, which Lynn alluded to, a lot of their argument seems to be, well, we're not going to make decisions about ideology, whether it's Breitbart or Huffington Post, and they're skipping the whole issue of the truthfulness of the actual sites that they're giving giant worldwide audiences to. In part, it looks to me like they're going, as they've tried it before, is sort of, I don't know, it's like, Tony Soprano. You're going to pay off some folks for peace. You're going to give them some money to have them shut up. And you've got so many desperate news organizations out there. $1 million, $2 million would be a whole lot. So I think you've had this process going on, this dance, whereby they're throwing a little money here and there for little local news projects. And it's like, newfangled Harvard-trained mobsters, trying to, extort folks into coming on their side. And I don't know what's going to happen, no clue what's going to happen with this new project, which I think you told me yesterday got itself a whole full-page ad in the Saturday Tribune announcing their great act of purity.
Right, so they're billing this as Facebook news. I think that's a fraud. We're here to talk about facts. Facebook is not producing news. They are not putting the time, the effort, and the money to pay people to cover things. That's what news producers do. They are not Facebook news. More truthful would be perhaps calling themselves Facebook distributors. If they're just going to put a story from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or Breitbart or the Tribune, they are not producing news. It shows, I think, they're trying to trick you way they're going, because if you're really, I'm telling you this, so don't be fooled. All they're doing is they're the equivalent of a very high-tech, sophisticated, smart delivery of news, like TV, like if you still get print, I hope you do, on your door. And I think this besets the mindset of that organization, because they still don't get it, and they're still trying to fool you.
And there's also, presumably legal self-interest involved. So by saying we're just a mere platform, we're not producing any of this stuff, you can put whatever slanders or libels you want, and they say, well, that's not us.
They have the deniability.
That was somebody else. We're just giving them the stage.
They still want the cachet and the credibility. of calling themselves Facebook News. And here's why I think that, and I will be interested, by the way, we are going to be taking questions, so start thinking them where you have a few minutes off. One of the reasons I think that is particularly corrosive by calling Facebook News, when it's Facebook distributes someone else's news, and at least they're paying for it, it shows that you are supposed to perhaps believe that therefore they're vetting news. And I don't know if it will be easy to say, here's the Facebook list of their approved sources. And if they're putting Breitbart on it, which does not have the same journalistic standards as some other outlets, no complaint that they're pro-Trump, right of center. It's just a standards and credibility issue I'm making here, that therefore when you see the junk news on Facebook, maybe it will, unfortunately and sadly, Jim, persuade people, oh, they've got a news thing going now, so when you see something that has one of the many fake news sites that erupt on Facebook, you might actually believe it's real. And that's why I think the Senate has had various proposals, and actually Senator Amy Klobuchar, who's a presidential candidate, has a bunch of proposals dealing with labeling ads on these outlets. But we'll see. So, Jim,
and make no mistake, Amy Klobuchar aside, because we've had a lot of dealings on Capitol Hill and throughout Europe, folks at the EU in Brussels, folks in London and Paris. The sensitivity to these issues is far, far greater in Europe than it is here. We've gotten nowhere fast on Capitol Hill. Amy Klobuchar would be an exception that proves the rule of total spinelessness when it comes to these issues, and already the tech guys have largely bought off a lot of the potential opposition in Washington. So for all the talk and all the op-eds about the glories of the First Amendment, folks in Europe are way, way, way more sensitive to these issues and have been much, much tougher on the likes of Google and Facebook than the U.S. has.
So, Jim, my question to you is, because let's move on from just Google and Facebook. When your kids tell you that they get their news from Snapchat and Instagram, are they wrong? What does it tell you? Two parents who come out of the print news business. Can you do a little cross-generational travel for us here?
This is too depressing. Let's get back to Trump. I try valiantly every morning at the marble top table in the kitchen. I take the Chicago Sun-Times home delivery, and I take the New York Times home delivery, $1,100 I think it costs a year, and it shows up maybe around 5:30, 6 o'clock. I do the breakfast, I get the lunches ready, and then next to their plates, one guy has the front page of the New York Times, the other has the front page of the Sun-Times, which is the Sun-Times is a fool's errand because the teenager quickly flips to the sports page, which is fine, better than nothing. And the 10-year-old who's got the New York Times is like, what is this about? And so every morning I will force him to force him to listen to me, tell him what the lead story is on the upper right and try to explain it. I think it's a fool's errand on my part. But anyway, I'm trying. As far as their news consumption patterns, it's very video-driven. It's stuff, even new, dramatically successful vehicles like a Chinese-owned one called TikTok, which is sort of like, I don't know, kind of an Instagram, Snapchat for a younger audience based on very, very, very short videos. So that's what they know, and frequently I'll have to disabuse them of a notion of something that they've seen, because they've seen a 30-second video, a 40-second video, and some rapper says this or that, and it must be true. And I go, what? I said, I'm paying all that tuition for University of Chicago Lab School, and that's what you think? Or in the case of the teenager, I'm paying all these property taxes for CPS, and then that's what you think? So I think it's really difficult because, I mean, never in the history of the world have kids had such instantaneous access to so much information, so much good information, but also so much crap.
But here's the point I want to make about where journalism has evolved. When Jim and I started, we were still using typewriters. There was no internet. There were no cell phones. There was no iPhone. If you wanted to get a copy of a lawsuit, you had to either go to an attorney's office or you go to the court and pull it. But my message, if anything, about journalism here is that journalism with a capital J is the same as it was no matter what platform. It is still our job to get facts and do it right, to correct things when you make a mistake, to make that extra call, to do original research, interviews, all the things real reporters do. I've been a platform agnostic for many years. I had one of the earliest blogs in the country dealing with politics. I started mine in 2006 when it was a pure blog. I was on Twitter early. The difference here is, and I think the most important thing to remember, that I don't know how this fever will break, but the journalism, the things that I got taught at Medill, the smartest thing I ever did was going to Medill, or else I wouldn't be sitting here today, is that the J in journalism is the same. And so even when you're dealing with different younger generations who consume news differently, I think our challenge is to figure out a way to deal with media literacy, to invest maybe more in media literacy education, to make people more discerning, to understand the difference. And I think, by the way, it is still okay to have fun. I get sucked down that hole of Facebook. But before we finish this thing, and time is running out, we have a president of the United States who is likely to be impeached very soon. And since we are talking about the impact of social media, President Trump wouldn't be president without Twitter. Jim, you covered, if we could just do this in a condensed form, we both covered the Clinton 1999 impeachment. Do you have any kind of compare and contrast points you could make as we hurl towards another one?
Well, also having sort of lived through, it wasn't formal impeachment, but the Nixon-Watergate hearings. I mean, if you put Nixon and Clinton sort of together, I think one salutary thing about what's playing out with Trump is this is all going to happen much quicker. This is all going to, Nancy Pelosi is going to have this on an accelerated course. Now, what the end result is, I mean, at this point, you couldn't possibly bet that there are going to be, 20 or so Republican senators who are going to switch and in a trial vote against Trump. At this point, not. Not surprisingly, the Trump folks think that somehow this will be of campaign advantage to them, whoever the Democratic opponent is, as he presumably casts himself as a great victim. I think it's way, 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 way too early. I mean, you had the dichotomy of during the whole Clinton-Lewinsky mess in 1998, where a sympathetic American public votes in a whole lot of Democrats in the midterm congressional elections that year, if you remember, 98. And so the Republicans were proved wrong. By that time, Newt Gingrich had gone downhill. But then fast forward to 2000, and Al Gore against George W. Bush. I mean, George W. Bush, remember, hit very hard on the need for a sort of new moral environment. And that had something to do with his victory. So I think it's very unpredictable. If he gets impeached, conventional wisdom is that the Republicans, don't go the next step. But I would not discount the possibility that a lot of folks just get sick and tired, and some of the groups that I'm going to be looking for, like in the Chicago suburbs, white college-educated women, how are they going to go? In the big cities, some key big cities in the Midwest, like Milwaukee and Detroit and Chicago, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, how is the core African-American Democratic female voter going to go if there's going to be a much bigger turnout than there was for Hillary Clinton? But there are two or three groups of women who I think hold the key to what happens in the presidential election next year.
Two quick stories. 1998, impeachment proceedings going on in the House Judiciary Committee. Henry Hyde, This audience is old enough to know who Henry Hyde is. I'm speaking to my people. He's the chairman. Somebody dropped a dime on him. Now, that is a phrase, by the way, that I can only use in a crowd like this. But somebody dropped a dime on him, and lo and behold, a story came out that in a Clinton impeachment proceeding where it wasn't officially about his affair with Monica Lewinsky, it was about other things, but all of a sudden we all got, somebody broke the story that Henry Hyde himself had an affair with a woman when he was a legislator in Springfield. And we at the Sun-Times, as other news outlets, had this picture of Henry and his friend on his lap. I believe it was on his lap. So I thought, well, that's just one height of hypocrisy. Quick story, too. It's a Saturday, 1998. The House is about to vote on impeaching Bill Clinton. Hillary Clinton had been up in the Hill that morning, begging Democrats to stick with her. Very unusual. We're in the House waiting what we thought the news would be just of the vote to impeach, and then we had Newt Gingrich was stepping down as Speaker. A man by the name of Robert Livingston was the Speaker designate. All of a sudden, he gets up and says he is quitting because it turned out he had an affair. And yet, a short time later, within that hour, two things happened. Bill Clinton was impeached, and a man by the name of Denny Hastert was elevated he was put on the road to become the Speaker. Well, we all know how that one turned out. Now it's time for some questions. And Josh, you've got a mic. Raise your hand, and we have one there. Lights on, thank you. Who's got questions? So Josh, find somebody and...
So there's two of us. We have about 12 minutes. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but make sure that your questions are actual questions and keep them brief so we can get to as many as we possibly can.
In other words, no speeches. A question.
Hello.
Hi.
Could you just name that website again?
Oh, yeah, sure. Our website is called NewsGuard Tech, one word, news, NEWSGUARD, tech.com. You just go on there and you'll see a little green button on the right, and it'll take you 2 minutes to download our stuff to your desktop or laptop. And if you want it on your cell phone, you've got to use Microsoft. Microsoft, actually, unlike Google and Facebook, loves us. And so we have a partnership with them, so you can get the Microsoft Edge browser, which is wonderful, but not many people use it. But if you use it, then you can get all this stuff on your cell.
And right back here in the middle.
I'd like you to react to this. It seems to me, at least so far, that the media is not very capable, particularly the television media, to deal with the culture of lying. That when you have somebody, a Republican, going on and saying that the impeachment proceeding is a star chamber, it took about 2 weeks before people started pointing out that there were Republicans in the room. And you still hear people going on TV saying that the Mueller report exonerated Trump. And it seems to me, when these kind of lies are postured, that it's up to the media at that point to give a response, to give the truth, rather than letting a lie be repeated over and over again.
I would love to address that because I know you singled out TV, but TV's not homogenous. Not every news outlet is homogenous. CNN mightily works to do fact checks mid-course now, and I agree, it took too long to put out that there are 3 committees in there, and each committee has Democrats and Republicans. There are 47 Republicans who can, and their staff, who at any minute can walk in and sit at the depositions that are taking place. And however, that did get out if you read everything, and here's the thing, I don't expect everybody to have read everything. It took too long, but it still was mentioned in articles. Now, it wasn't the lead, and maybe that's what it needed, because it wasn't clear until most recently that this was an infection in the way it was, that people weren't believing it. But the change that Trump brought to journalism, and this is in a way for the better, is that it made fact-checking into a full-time profession for some. No shortage of work. So that is, so I want to say if we were, yes, it was too late, but yes, it is being corrected. And the power that Trump has, however, is you could do all the fact checks you want, and the reason our culture and our government and our civil society is at a crossroads is that there are still people who believe what Trump says despite the fact checks, and that's what we're grappling with right now. Next question.
And remember, again, those hollowed out newsrooms, I mean, you don't have fact-checking in your basic local television newsroom, and that's the place where most people get their news. I mean, I try to tell my friends in New York and Washington who may get up in the morning and be watching Morning Joe and MSNBC that when I'm on the WGN Morning News in the third largest television market in the United States, there are more people watching Robin Baumgarten and Larry Potash on the WGN Morning News in this market than are watching Fox, MSNBC, CNN, HLN, and CNBC combined. There are 8 times more people watching them than are watching Mika and Joe. Problem is that a lot of these stations just don't have those capabilities, and even the major networks, they don't have them to the extent that you would like to. And it leads to what I think is one of the real sort of conundrums of this age, and I feel it every day. Never have we had, again, as much access to as much information in the history of the world. But never have we necessarily felt more misinformed. I don't necessarily feel more informed as I am as I'm looking at my phone and I see 28 bulletins at any given time. So it's a real trick, and how a younger generation is going to deal with that and edit stuff and separate the wheat from the chaff, I don't know.
Who's that?
Opposite side over there.
Okay.
Question here.
Question for Jim. You mentioned your website, NewsGuard, was for-profit. Where does your money come from?
Well, one of our problems was that we couldn't take and can't take a penny really from media operations, which in an age in which Disney is giving gave $400 million, twice $200 million to Vice, and has already written off most of that as a disaster. And Comcast, the big cable company, has given BuzzFeed, in the search for young consumers, the desperate search for young consumers.
So the money comes from?
They gave $200 million. So a hodgepodge of folks.
Do you disclose your donors on your site?
Yeah, we
Could you
disclosed
name
our
them?
donors.
Do you want to give her a few?
You wouldn't know. I mean, there's a
maybe.
French ad guy, I can't remember his name, in Paris. There are people here in Chicago whose names you would know who's given us some money.
But you could look on the you could look on the website, and is that it? If you look on NewsGuard? Okay. And I'm only trying to rush a little bit because I see a lot of questions. We'll try and be shorter with answers so we could speed dial through this. Yes.
Everybody likes to pick on Facebook, and I can understand why, but I'm not sure how regulating anything on Facebook would make sense. Isn't 90% of the stuff lies anyway, whether it's in a personal news feed or somebody's personal feed? I mean, Facebook is based upon misrepresenting reality. And do we really want Mark Zuckerberg determining what's real and what's not?
Let me jump at that, and I know we could spend all days on this. When it comes to paid advertising, though, and fake sites, that's different. If you go do a post on Facebook, I just came from a Humanities festival, and here's my evaluation of it, opinion. If you said, I just came from this session and Jill Abramson was great, that's a factor. So there are differences here, and there are things that need to be addressed that are outside of First Amendment issues and the pure subjectivity that goes into something you may post in the personal feed. The reason Facebook is so corrosive is that Facebook has gone from just a way to stay connected. I went to my high school reunion a few weeks ago, and we had great conversations on our, von Subin class web page. It's delightful. Facebook is more than that, though. And that's what the issue is when it's people pretending to be things they're not. Next question.
We have a question here on the left.
In terms of the 2020 election, what do you think about the kids, like the Parkland kids? Will they have an effect? The young people.
Do you want to take a stab?
No clue about them. I mean, I think we tend to every cycle announce that there's some youth movement out there that's going to take somebody over the top. Usually the Democrats doesn't quite pan out in the same way. I mean, obviously it's helped individual candidates here and there, like maybe the last time Bernie Sanders, but I think it's too early to say if, for instance, any of these Democratic candidates are going to be motivating kids in any truly appreciable way.
Right. The Parkland kids, I mean, some of them are well known if they make an endorsement. The issue of gun control is one that is a divisive issue. And again, I'm just abbreviating this. When Beto O'Rourke said at the debate that he wants to take assault weapons, that gave a lot of ammunition to Republicans because most Democrats who are running see a difference between buybacks and confiscation. Next question.
We got one back here, over on your left.
What do you think about the credibility of Alexa?
Of the what?
Alexa?
I couldn't hear you. Credibility of
Alexa?
Alexa?
I mean,
what the thing you talk to, Alexa?
Yeah, the thing that talks to you, tells you the news. Alexa?
Well, okay. Well, interesting question. I'll do it real quick. I thought, but you have a good point. Alexa's database is only as good as the database that the voice has. And now you have a point. If you say, Alexa, what's the temperature in Washington? I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a good answer. I don't know if you say, Alexa, who is right on First Amendment freedoms, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, or Amy Klobuchar, I don't know what the answer would be. Jim, could you take a stab?
Well, knowing that even when I ask in the kitchen for Alexa to give me, Keith Jarrett music, she's listening to everything I say, and my expectations of privacy in this world have sort of disappeared. I mean, people are ripping off my emails. People are probably stealing my credit card information, and it's discouraging. I don't know, the whole notion of privacy has sort of been obliterated by Alexa and many others.
Okay, I would say find another source of information. Don't ask her hard questions.
We have time
Next.
for two quick other ones.
okay.
We'll try to get to them when we can. Do you have one over there, Kelly? No? Yes.
Hi, I was intrigued by Lynn's comment about having literacy for the young people. I don't think kids even know what's going on. They're busy watching videos and Snapchat, and how are we going to get young people to even get involved?
Okay, actually remember the platform is not the problem. It's the content on the platform. Nothing wrong with Snapchat if that tells you something. If you have a 5-second comment from a newsmaker that's credible and true, that's good. Nothing wrong with it. It's just credibility. The answer to news literacy is longer than we have here, but it is a question that actually is more than just a generational thing. It spans all age groups, and there are new movements, new organizations on it. Sorry if it's not everything, but it's a long one. And can we have 2 more questions? I know you said one, but everybody has so many hands, so can
They do, and we'd be here all day, but
okay.
I got to get out. I got to change this room over, so we got time for one more.
Okay, see? Sorry, guys.
Hi there. I think part of the reason we have the orange idiot in the White House is because during the campaign, he
Get
drew
the question. Please spit out the question faster, only because we're getting on a
during the
deadline.
campaign, he drew eyes, he drew money.
Right, the question is?
So how do we maintain an independent media without having it so money dependent that what all we get is Kardashian news and Trump-like stuff?
Well, you have to get used to paying for it. Do you subscribe to anything, any news outlet that you pay for? You pay for it. Jim?
And obviously this brings up, sort of a critical mistake that a lot of the mainstream media made, newspapers paramount in sort of misjudging the future significance of the internet, and thinking initially in most quarters that it was just going to be a little add-on and not have to worry about big audiences being lured by it. And then by the time they realized there were large audiences and maybe they should be charging for their content, a lot of it had essentially been stolen by Google in particular. And you had acculturated, basically acclimated a generation of consumers of all ages to free content. That's what I'd like to know about my kids. Will they, post-college or post-high school, be willing to pay for actual news content? They're clearly willing to pay, that generation, for other sorts of content like entertainment and music. But having addicted people to free content for so long, the challenge of the Chicago Sun-Times or Chicago Tribune is getting a large enough group to pay substantial amounts of money for this great work that they're trying to do.
And with that, the hour of noon is upon us. Thank you all so much for coming, and I thank the Chicago Humanities Festival for hosting us. Have a good day, everyone.